Welcome to Buddha's Healing, a quiet place where we gently reflect on the wisdom of the Buddha and learn how to care for the heart. Calm the mind and walk through life with greater peace. Dear friends, there comes a season of life after 70 that feels different. Quieter, slower, more reflective, and for many people, more tiring not only physically, but emotionally. Spiritually, deep inside, many people after 70 quietly say things like, "I don't have the same energy anymore. Everything feels heavier now. Even simple things seem harder." And yes, part of this is natural. The body changes. Energy changes. Sleep changes. The Buddha gently reminded us again and again, everything in life is impermanent. Youth changes. Strength changes. Health changes. The body naturally moves through seasons. There is nothing wrong with this. Nothing to be ashamed of. But dear friends, here is something many people quietly overlook. Not every kind of tiredness comes from aging. Sometimes, the body feels exhausted because the heart has quietly been carrying too much for too long. Invisible things, emotional things, heavy things, things no one else sees, worry, loneliness, old regret. Emotional pain, silent sadness, the pressure to stay strong, and because these burdens quietly grow over time. Many people no longer notice how heavy they have become. They simply say, "I guess this is old age." But perhaps part of the exhaustion is not age. Perhaps the heart is simply tired from carrying too much. Have you ever noticed this? Some people in their 70s still seem deeply alive, peaceful, gentle, emotionally light, even with physical limitations. Something about them feels calm, steady, warm, and then there are others who feel emotionally exhausted, drained, restless, heavy, always tired, quickly irritated, unable to fully rest. Why? Sometimes health matters, of course, but often, something deeper quietly shapes the experience of aging. The emotional atmosphere inside the heart, because dear friends, the body listens to the heart, the nervous system listens, sleep listens, energy listens. What we repeatedly carry emotionally quietly shapes how life feels. Especially after 70, when emotional heaviness becomes harder to hide. Today, we are going to gently reflect on 5 silent mistakes many people over 70, unknowingly, make mistakes that quietly drain emotional energy, disturb inner peace, and leave the heart feeling exhausted, not to create guilt, not to create fear, but to create awareness, because awareness is where healing begins. Together, we will gently explore things such as carrying too much worry every day, holding emotional pain too long, living in emotional loneliness without speaking about it, overthinking the past and replaying regret, and one of the quietest struggles of all after 70, ignoring the heart's need for emotional rest. Please hear this gently. This reflection is not about blame. It is about compassion, because many people over 70 spent decades carrying responsibilities, families, marriage, children, bills, work, loss, grief, sacrifice. Many learned how to survive, how to stay strong, how to endure, but very few people were taught how to emotionally rest, how to soften, how to stop carrying what no longer belongs in the heart. And perhaps this season of life is quietly asking something different. Not more struggle, not more pressure, but gentleness, stillness, compassion. Perhaps healing after 70 is not about becoming stronger. Perhaps healing begins with carrying less fear, less regret, less emotional heaviness, less unnecessary suffering. Maybe peace begins not by fixing everything, but by finally whispering, "I have carried enough. I deserve gentleness too. I no longer want to suffer this way." So before we continue, take one slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and gently ask yourself, what emotional burden has quietly been draining my energy? Because sometimes the thing quietly exhausting us is not only the body. Sometimes it is the invisible weight the heart never stopped carrying. Let us gently begin with the first silent mistake many people over 70, unknowingly, make one so common that most people barely notice it anymore. And that mistake is carrying too much worry every single day, not ordinary concern, not healthy planning, but the kind of worry that quietly becomes constant, a habit, a companion, a background noise inside the mind that never fully rests. After 70, worry often changes shape. When people are younger, they worry about work, bills, building a future, raising children, but later in life, the worries become quieter and somehow heavier: health, doctors, aging, memory, losing independence, financial uncertainty, family struggles, the future of children and grandchildren. And perhaps one of the deepest worries of all, what happens if life becomes harder than I can handle? Dear friends, please hear this gently. Fear is deeply human. Worry is deeply human. You are not weak for feeling afraid sometimes. You are not failing. The Buddha understood uncertainty. He understood fear. He understood suffering. But he also taught something quietly profound. The mind suffers most when it begins living inside imagined futures. How often does this happen? The body sits quietly in a safe room, yet the mind travels somewhere frightening. A future illness, a financial problem, a lonely ending, worst-case scenarios, things that have not happened, things that may never happen, and slowly, without realizing it, the nervous system becomes tired, very tired. Sleep becomes lighter, energy fades, patience thins, peace becomes harder to feel, even joyful moments feel interrupted. Because somewhere inside, the mind is still preparing for danger, always asking, what if my health declines? What if I become dependent? What if something happens to my family? What if things get worse? Dear friends, how exhausting that becomes, to mentally rehearse suffering every day. And perhaps many people listening today know exactly how this feels. The body is tired, but the heart feels tired too, because the mind never truly rests. The Buddha gently reminded people again and again. The future has not arrived. The past has already passed. This moment is where life is happening, not tomorrow. Not imagined fears, not painful possibilities, just this breath, this room, this ordinary moment. And yet, how often do we miss life while preparing for fear, watching grandchildren laugh, yet worrying, enjoying dinner, yet worrying, lying safely in bed, yet worrying, dear friends. Worry often disguises itself as responsibility. People say, I am just being realistic. I care too much not to worry. I am trying to stay prepared. And perhaps some of that is true. Preparation is wise, but emotional suffering in advance is exhausting. Preparing says, I will do what I can. Worry says, I must mentally carry every possible disaster, and over time, that emotional burden quietly drains energy. The body feels it, sleep feels it, peace feels it, because, dear friends, the heart was never meant to carry tomorrow every single day. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones, every day, everywhere. At first, perhaps you adjust. Eventually, the shoulders ache, walking feels harder, the body grows tired. Worry works this way too. At first, it feels protective, responsible, necessary, then slowly, it becomes emotional heaviness. And perhaps the saddest part, many people become so used to worrying, they forget what rest even feels like. They say, I've always been like this. This is just who I am. But dear friends, A lifelong habit does not always mean a healthy habit. Peace still matters, softness still matters, rest still matters, especially after 70, because after 70, the body feels emotional stress more honestly. The nervous system becomes less forgiving, and what once felt manageable begins feeling heavy. Perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may place a hand gently over your heart, take one slow breath, and whisper softly, "I have carried enough for today. Tomorrow does not need me tonight. This moment deserves my peace." Sometimes, healing begins this gently. One quieter breath, one softer thought, one moment of finally allowing the heart to rest. There was a woman named Margaret. She was 74 years old, living alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver. Most people described Margaret as thoughtful, responsible, the kind of person who always worried about others before herself. She checked on family constantly, remembered birthdays, sent cards, called her children every week. And even after retirement, her mind never truly rested. At first, worry had seemed useful when her children were young. She worried about school, safety, money, health. As they became adults, the worries changed shape. Jobs, marriage, grandchildren, finances, and somehow, even when life seemed okay, Margaret still found something to fear. Her son had a stable career. Still, she worried he secretly struggled. Her daughter looked happy. Still, Margaret feared something bad might happen. Her grandchildren laughed and played. Still, she worried about the world they were growing up in. And at night, the worries became louder. The house grew quiet. The lights turned off, and suddenly, her mind became crowded. What if I get sick? What if I lose my independence? What if I become a burden? What if something happens to my family? What if? Her sleep slowly changed. She woke often, felt tired during the day, forgot little things, became emotionally drained. Even beautiful moments felt interrupted. Sunday dinners, phone calls with family, sunlight through the kitchen window. Part of her was always somewhere else. Inside tomorrow, inside imagined problems, inside fear. One afternoon during lunch, her daughter Sarah looked at her gently. Mom. Margaret smiled. Yes. Sarah hesitated. You don't seem peaceful anymore. The sentence lingered. Margaret laughed softly. What do you mean? You were always worried, even when things are okay. That evening, for the first time in a long while, Margaret sat quietly in her living room. No television, no distractions. Just silence and honesty. She realized something painful, even during peaceful moments. She had rarely allowed herself peace. Fear always interrupted, always whispered, always prepared for disaster. Weeks later, at a routine doctor's appointment, her physician gently said, "You seem tired." Margaret sighed softly. "I am getting older." The doctor smiled kindly. Maybe, then paused. But sometimes people your age aren't only physically tired. Sometimes they are emotionally tired. Emotionally tired, the phrase stayed with her. A month later, a neighbor invited Margaret to a small mindfulness group at a community center. At first, she nearly declined. Too busy, too awkward, too unfamiliar, but quietly, something inside felt exhausted enough to try. The teacher that evening spoke softly. Nothing dramatic, no pressure, just calm honesty. At one point, he said, "Worry feels responsible until responsibility becomes suffering." Margaret sat very still. Then came another sentence. A sentence that somehow landed directly in her heart. You do not protect tomorrow by sacrificing today. Her chest tightened because suddenly, she realized how much life she had quietly missed. The peaceful mornings, the laughter, the small ordinary moments, always interrupted by imagined fear. Then the teacher asked, What if peace begins not when uncertainty disappears, but when we stop demanding certainty from life? Tears quietly filled Margaret's eyes, because for the first time, she understood something difficult. She had confused worry with love. She thought worrying proved caring, but really, it had only made her tired. So very tired, slowly, things began changing, not dramatically, not perfectly, just gently, before bed. Margaret started writing worries in a small notebook, then closing it, as if softly telling her mind, enough for today. When fear arrived, she practiced breathing instead of spiraling when anxious thoughts came. She gently whispered, "This moment is okay." Little by little, the tension softened, sleep improved. The heaviness eased, joy quietly returned. Months later, Sarah smiled one afternoon and said, "You feel lighter lately." Margaret laughed softly. "I think I finally stopped trying to survive problems that haven't happened yet." And for the first time in years, she truly meant it. Dear friends, perhaps there is a Margaret somewhere inside many of us. A heart that loves deeply, yet worries endlessly. Please hear this gently. Your care matters, your love matters. But worry is not the same thing as protection. Fear cannot guarantee safety. Anxiety cannot prevent pain. And mentally suffering in advance rarely prepares us for life. It simply exhausts the spirit. Perhaps after 70, the invitation becomes softer, not to control tomorrow, but to gently return to today, to breathe a little deeper, to trust a little more, to finally rest, because, dear friends, peace still belongs to you, even now. Dear friends, let us gently move into the second silent mistake. Many people over 70, unknowingly, make one that quietly drains emotional energy for years. And that mistake is holding on to emotional pain for too long. Old disappointment, old heartbreak, old resentment, old grief, sometimes carried so quietly no one else even notices, yet somehow the heart keeps carrying it. Please hear this gently. Pain is real. The Buddha never asked people to deny suffering. He never taught people to pretend heartbreak did not hurt. Loss hurts. Betrayal hurts. Family disappointment hurts. Loneliness hurts. Words spoken long ago can still echo inside the heart years later, and after 70. Many people quietly carry emotional histories that were never fully healed. A painful divorce, a sibling conflict, estranged children, old misunderstandings, regret, broken trust, or perhaps simply grief for a life that unfolded differently than expected. And slowly, without realizing it, the emotional wound becomes familiar, almost part of identity. People quietly say, "I'll never forgive them." Some things cannot be forgotten. That hurt changed me forever, and dear friends, perhaps some of that is true. Some pain changes us, some wounds stay tender, but today, we gently ask a deeper question. What is holding onto this pain costing you now? Because emotional pain carried too long quietly changes life. Sleep becomes harder, energy fades, patience grows thinner. Joy becomes interrupted. The nervous system becomes tired, and sometimes, the body quietly carries what the heart refuses to release. The Buddha once compared anger to holding burning coal, with the intention of throwing it at someone else. Before it harms another person, it burns the hand holding it, and emotional pain often works the same way. At first, it feels protective, understandable, even necessary, but eventually, it quietly becomes exhausting. The Buddha gently taught again and again, suffering grows when attachment grows, and one of the hardest attachments to release is attachment to pain, not because people want to suffer, but because pain becomes familiar, predictable. Part of the story we tell ourselves. Some people quietly build emotional walls around old wounds. This is why I don't trust. This is why I stay guarded. This is why I expect disappointment, and slowly, pain stops visiting, it moves in. Dear friends, forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many people believe forgiveness means saying, "What happened was okay." But forgiveness is not approval. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness simply whispers, "I no longer want this pain controlling the peace I still have left." That is all, and perhaps that choice changes more than we realize. Because after 70, peace matters deeply, sleep matters deeply, energy matters deeply, the years ahead matter deeply. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase everywhere you go, every room, every season, every relationship. At first, perhaps you barely notice. Eventually, the shoulders ache, walking feels harder, the body grows tired. Old emotional pain works the same way. At first, it feels understandable, then it becomes habit, then heaviness, then exhaustion, and perhaps the saddest part, many people become so used to carrying emotional heaviness. They forget what lightness even feels like. Dear friends, please hear this gently. You do not have to force healing. Healing takes time. You do not have to pretend pain never mattered. It mattered deeply, but perhaps you no longer need to relive the same wound every day, because your peace matters too. Your sleep matters too. Your remaining years matter too. Perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, what old hurt am I still carrying? Has this pain protected me, or has it quietly exhausted me? Sometimes, healing begins quietly, not dramatically. Sometimes healing begins with one honest whisper, "I am tired of carrying this." There was a man named Edward. He was 78 years old, living in a small town outside Nashville. If you met Edward for the first time, you might describe him as polite, quiet, independent, the kind of man who still mowed his own lawn, still waved to neighbors, still showed up for Sunday church. From the outside, life looked peaceful. But quietly, Edward carried something heavy, something old, something painful, a resentment he had been holding for more than 20 years. Toward his son, David. The pain began after a family argument long ago. David had moved across the country for work. The distance created tension. Then misunderstandings followed, missed holidays, unreturned phone calls. Words spoken in frustration. One painful argument became silence. At first, Edward told himself he made his choice. If he wanted a relationship, he would call. "I am done chasing." And perhaps part of that pain felt justified. Perhaps David had truly hurt him, but quietly, something else happened too. Edward never stopped replaying the story. Late at night, he remembered old arguments, the missed birthdays, the silence, the disappointment. Sometimes while sitting on the porch, sometimes before sleep, sometimes during holidays, especially during holidays. Because holidays made absence louder. One empty chair somehow said everything. Over time, the emotional heaviness quietly spread. Sleep became harder, energy faded, patience shortened. Little things irritated him, the loneliness deepened. Though he rarely admitted it, one afternoon while helping at church, an old friend gently asked, "How's David doing?" Edward shrugged. Haven't talked in years. The friend paused, then softly asked, "Do you miss him?" Edward immediately answered, "Not anymore." But later that evening, sitting alone in the kitchen, the truth quietly surfaced. Yes. He missed him deeply, more than he wanted to admit. Months later, during a routine checkup, the doctor gently asked, "How have you been emotionally?" Edward laughed awkwardly. "Emotionally?" The doctor smiled kindly. "Yes." "Are you carrying anything heavy?" The question lingered, heavy. That word felt painfully accurate, because honestly, yes, very heavy. A few weeks later, a neighbor invited Edward to a mindfulness discussion group. At first, he almost declined. Not really his kind of thing, but something inside quietly felt tired enough to go. One evening during the group, the teacher said something that immediately caught Edward's attention. Sometimes we continue suffering long after the painful moment has ended. The room grew still. Then came another sentence. Not because pain is still happening, but because we continue feeding it. Edward sat very still. Then the teacher added, "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means no longer allowing pain to control the peace still available to you." Peace still available to you. The sentence stayed with him because suddenly, Edward realized something difficult. The argument with David lasted one afternoon, but emotionally, he had relived it for 20 years. 20 years, and somehow, he felt tired, not angry anymore, just tired, tired of carrying the ache. Tired of replaying the same story, tired of losing peace. That night, Edward sat alone in the kitchen. No television, no distractions, just silence and memory. He thought about David as a child, little league games, camping trips, birthday cakes, laughter, bedtime stories, and suddenly, the resentment softened, not disappeared. But softened because underneath the anger, there had always been love. A week later, Edward picked up the phone. His hand trembled. He nearly put it back down twice. Finally, he called. No speech prepared, no dramatic plan. Just honesty. When David answered, there was a long silence. Then Edward quietly said, "Hey, pause. I know it's been a long time." Another pause, then softly, "I miss you." Silence. Then something unexpected. David cried, quietly, and for the first time in years. So did Edward. Healing was not instant. There were difficult conversations, old hurt, awkward moments. Regret, honesty, but slowly something changed. Phone calls returned, visits happened, grandchildren came around more. And strangely, Edward changed too. Sleep improved, the heaviness eased, his laughter returned, even neighbors noticed. One Sunday morning, a friend smiled and said, "You seem lighter lately." Edward laughed softly. "I think I finally got tired of carrying bricks," and for the first time in years, he truly meant it. Dear friends, perhaps there is an Edward somewhere inside many of us, an old wound, an old disappointment, a pain quietly replayed when no one else sees. Please hear this gently. Your pain matters. What happened mattered. But so does your peace, especially after 70, because heavy things become harder to carry with time. You do not have to force forgiveness. Healing takes time, but perhaps you no longer need to relive the same wound every single day. Because old pain often promises protection, but eventually, it quietly becomes exhaustion. Sometimes healing begins with one honest whisper. I am tired of suffering this way. And perhaps that quiet honesty becomes the beginning of peace. If today's reflection touched your heart, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this healing journey with us. And if there is something painful your heart has quietly carried for too long, perhaps leave a gentle comment below. Healing often begins when we stop carrying pain in silence. Dear friends, let us gently move into the third silent mistake. Many people over 70, unknowingly, make one that quietly drains emotional energy more deeply than many realize. And that mistake is living in emotional loneliness without speaking about it, not simply being alone, not simply living by yourself, but carrying loneliness quietly, silently, without words, without reaching out, without letting anyone truly see what the heart has been carrying. After 70, Loneliness changes shape. Sometimes it comes after losing a spouse, sometimes after retirement, sometimes after children move away, sometimes after friendships naturally become fewer, and sometimes the loneliness arrives even while surrounded by people. Family nearby, neighbors nearby, church nearby, yet somehow the heart still feels distant, unseen. Quietly aching, please hear this gently. Loneliness after 70 is deeply human. You are not weak for feeling it. You are not failing, and no, you are certainly not alone. The Buddha understood suffering. He understood how disconnected hearts quietly hurt. He taught again and again about compassion, community, kindness, because suffering often grows heavier when carried in silence. And yet, many people over 70 quietly become experts at hiding loneliness. They smile politely, say, "I am fine. Just keeping busy," can complain, even when something inside quietly hurts. Why? Because many people grew up learning. Stay strong. Do not burden others. Keep private pain private. Do not complain, and slowly, silence becomes habit. The loneliness deepens quietly, not because people do not care, but because pain hidden too long becomes invisible. Even to the people who love us, dear friends, how exhausting that becomes to quietly ache, yet never speak. To miss connection, yet feel unsure how to ask for it. To feel lonely, yet believe you must simply endure it. Today, we gently reflect on something important. What happens when loneliness becomes invisible? The Buddha often reminded people, no heart heals entirely alone. Human beings are deeply interconnected. We suffer together, heal together, grow together. And perhaps one of the quiet tragedies later in life is this: many people slowly stop reaching outward. Not because they want isolation, but because rejection feels painful, because loss feels painful, because asking feels vulnerable. And vulnerability feels frightening, especially after years of being strong. Some people quietly think, everyone is busy. I don't want to bother anyone. People have their own lives, and slowly, the phone stops ringing. Invitations become fewer. The heart grows quieter, not more peaceful, just quieter, lonelier, dear friends. Please hear this gently. Wanting companionship is not weakness. Wanting emotional closeness is not weakness. Wanting someone to truly ask, "How are you really?" is not weakness. These are deeply human needs at every age. Especially after 70. Imagine carrying invisible sadness through ordinary days, going grocery shopping, making coffee, watching television, smiling politely, yet quietly wishing someone would simply sit beside you. Really talk, really listen, really understand, dear friends. Loneliness after 70 is often grief in disguise. Grief for people, for seasons of life, for routines that once brought comfort, for the version of life that used to feel familiar. And perhaps, one of the hardest forms of loneliness is emotional loneliness, being around people, yet still feeling unseen. Still feeling emotionally distant, still feeling misunderstood. Please hear this gently. You are not asking for too much. Wanting warmth is not weakness. Wanting connection is not weakness. Wanting someone to truly care is deeply human. Perhaps tonight, you might gently ask yourself, how lonely has my heart quietly become? Have I hidden my pain too well? Who could I gently reach toward? Because sometimes, healing begins not with grand solutions. Sometimes, healing begins with one small moment of honesty, one returned phone call, one open conversation, one quiet step toward connection. There was a woman named Alina. She was 81 years old, living alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Charleston. If you passed her house in the afternoon, You might see her watering flowers on the porch, waving kindly to neighbors, smiling softly, the kind of smile that seemed gentle, steady, peaceful, and whenever someone asked, "How are you doing?" Alina always gave the same answer. "Oh, I am doing just fine." But the truth, she had been lonely for years, ever since her husband, Frank, passed away. 50 years of marriage, 50 years of ordinary moments shared, morning coffee, dinner conversations, little jokes no one else understood, the comfort of simply hearing someone move around the house, and then one day, silence, a different kind of silence, heavy silence. At first, people came around often, her children visited, neighbors checked in, church friends brought meals, everyone said, "Call if you need anything," and Alina appreciated it. She really did, but slowly. Life moved forward, the visits became less frequent, phone calls shorter, holidays busier. Everyone meant well, but somehow, the house grew quieter, much quieter at first. Alina tried staying busy, television, gardening, puzzles, cleaning things that did not need cleaning. Anything to avoid sitting too long with the silence, because silence made the loneliness louder, especially evenings. Evenings were the hardest. Dinner for one, a quiet living room, no one asking, "How was your day?" No one saying goodnight. Sometimes, she found herself speaking out loud just to hear a voice, then softly laughing at herself afterward. One Sunday afternoon, her grandson Ethan stopped by unexpectedly. While sitting on the porch, he looked at her carefully. Grandma Alina smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," he hesitated. "You seem sad lately." She immediately smiled. "Oh no, I am fine." But Ethan stayed quiet, then softly said, "No, really," something about the way he asked made pretending suddenly feel exhausting. Alina looked down at her hands, then quietly whispered, "It gets lonely." The words surprised even her, because she had not said them out loud in years. Lonely. The truth finally had a name. Ethan gently reached for her hand. "You know you don't have to do this alone." That sentence stayed with her. Do this alone, because suddenly, Alina realized something painful. She had become so afraid of burdening others that she stopped allowing people to care for her. Weeks later, at Ethan's encouragement, Alina reluctantly joined a local senior discussion group. At first, she hated it. Awkward introductions, small talk, name tags, the kind of thing she usually avoided. She nearly stopped going after the first meeting. But then, a woman around her age quietly sat beside her and said, "You lose your husband too." Alina nodded softly. The woman sighed. "Hardest thing I ever went through." Something shifted, not dramatically, just quietly. Because for the first time in a long while, someone understood without explanation, week after week. Alina kept showing up. Coffee after meetings, shared stories, laughter, grief, friendship, little by little. The loneliness softened, not disappeared, but softened. One afternoon during a mindfulness gathering, the teacher gently said, "Loneliness grows heavier when we believe we must carry it alone." The room became quiet. Then came another sentence. "Healing begins when the heart remembers it still belongs somewhere." Belongs somewhere. The word stayed with Alina because suddenly, she realized something beautiful. Her life had changed. Yes, loss remained. Yes, but connection was still possible. Warmth was still possible. Being cared for was still possible. Months later, Ethan visited again. "You seem happier lately," he smiled. Alina laughed softly. "How? You don't seem so lonely." She looked out toward the garden for a moment, then smiled gently. "I think I finally stopped pretending I had to be strong all by myself, and somehow, that honesty changed everything." Dear friends, perhaps there is an Alina somewhere inside many of us, Someone quietly carrying loneliness behind a polite smile. Someone missing connection, yet unsure how to ask for it. Please hear this gently. Loneliness is not weakness. Needing companionship is not weakness. Wanting warmth, conversation, connection, these are deeply human needs. Especially after 70, especially after loss, and perhaps the strongest thing you can do is not continue hiding the loneliness. Perhaps strength begins with honesty, the courage to whisper, I miss people, I feel lonely, I do not want to carry this alone anymore. Because, dear friends, healing often begins there. One phone call, one invitation, one honest conversation. One quiet moment of letting someone in. Perhaps tonight, you might gently ask yourself, where has my heart stopped reaching outward? Who could I gently reconnect with? Because even after heartbreak, even after silence, even after loneliness, connection still heals. Dear friends, as we gently come to the end of today's reflection, perhaps the deepest truth we can carry into the heart is this. Feeling tired after 70 is not always about age. Sometimes, the body feels exhausted because the heart has quietly been carrying too much for too long. Invisible burdens, emotional burdens, heavy things no one else can see today. We gently reflected on silent mistakes many people over 70 unknowingly carry. Too much worry, old emotional pain, loneliness hidden behind strength, invisible burdens that quietly drain peace, interrupt sleep, exhaust emotional energy, and slowly make life feel heavier than it truly needs to feel. Not because anyone has failed, not because anyone is weak, but because the human heart was never meant to carry endless heaviness forever. Many people over 70 have survived so much: loss, change, disappointment, health struggles, goodbyes, unexpected endings, grief, responsibilities, and somehow still kept going, still remained kind, still carried love for others. Dear friends, that matters. Please take a quiet moment to honor how much you have carried, because perhaps no one says this enough. You have been strong for a very long time, and maybe now, this season of life is gently asking something different from you. Not more endurance, not more pressure, not more emotional suffering, but softness, compassion, rest. The Buddha gently reminded people again and again, suffering grows heavier when we cling too tightly. To fear, to pain, to loneliness, to stories the mind quietly repeats, not because attachment makes us bad, but because carrying too much quietly exhausts even the strongest heart. And perhaps this season of life is softly asking, what am I finally ready to stop carrying? Not because it never mattered, but because peace matters too. Sleep matters too. Gentleness matters too. The years ahead matter too, dear friends. Perhaps healing after 70 is not about becoming stronger. Perhaps healing begins with carrying less. Less fear, less regret, less emotional heaviness, less trying to survive futures that have not happened. Less pretending you are fine when your heart quietly hurts. Maybe healing begins with honesty, with breathing, with finally whispering, I have carried enough, I deserve gentleness too, I no longer want to suffer this way. Please hear this gently. You are not weak for feeling tired. You are not failing for feeling lonely. You are not broken for struggling to let go. You are deeply human, and sometimes being human means carrying burdens longer than we meant to. But healing remains possible, even now. Especially now, because peace does not belong only to younger years. Peace still belongs to you after 70. After heartbreak, after disappointment, after grief, after mistakes, after all the ways life unfolded differently than expected. You are still allowed rest. You are still allowed joy. you are still allowed emotional healing, and perhaps tonight. Before sleep, you might place a hand gently over your heart, take one slow breath, and quietly ask yourself, what burden no longer belongs in this season of my life? What emotional weight am I finally ready to release? What would carrying less feel like? Because sometimes, healing does not begin by changing everything. Sometimes, healing begins with one quiet decision, to stop carrying what no longer needs to be carried. If today's reflection brought even a small sense of comfort, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of mindfulness, healing, and inner peace with us. And if there is something your heart has quietly carried for too long, feel free to gently share it in the comments. Sometimes healing begins the moment we realize we no longer have to suffer in silence. May your heart grow lighter, may your sleep become softer, and may peace gently find its way back to you. One quiet breath at a time.